This program contains strong language, including first-hand instances of racism. Viewer discretion is advised.
Good evening. I'm Sylvester Turner. I'm proud to serve as mayor of the city of Houston, a great city, a vibrant city, a diverse city. And part of what makes us so wonderful is our ability to work together and appreciate one another. Tonight, we have an opportunity to be part of a longer conversation focusing on the relationship between the Black and white communities of our city, a discussion we all should be having. We want this show to be a conversation starter in your own home and community. Also, feel free to share your thoughts with us on Twitter using the hashtag HOUBW. You can even pause the show if you would like and let it inspire discussion with those around you. Use this program as a way to talk more openly and honestly about race and our understanding of one another as we work to build a stronger, better future for all Houston. And now, Houston in Black and White.
Today we gather to explore the relationship between the white and black communities of Houston. I'm Ernie Manous.
And I'm Eddie Robinson. The hope is that by the end of our time together, by having had an honest discussion, we will all think a little differently about race and have a better understanding of each other.
Joining us today to discuss these issues are Reverend Hannah Terry from the Fondren Apartment Ministry, Natalie Arsenault, conservative radio talk show host and business consultant, author and activist Derek Mohammed, and from the University of Houston, Dr. Andrew Hamilton.
To begin with, Ernie and I went out into the community to meet with two groups of Houstonians. I met with 6 African Americans.
And I met with 6 Houston Anglos. Each group was asked basically the same questions. Their comments don't by any means represent everything that was said by the groups, but they do give us a good place to begin our conversation.
Most people refer to Houston as a melting pot, when in actuality I feel like it's more like a salad bar. I think everything is represented, but it's all in its own section. I don't think anybody's really coming together. I think there's all kinds of ethnicities and cultures and stuff represented in Houston, but I wouldn't necessarily call it a melting pot like everybody's blending together.
The thing that bothers me about the city of Houston is we still have a large section of the city that is basically just segregated. And I don't think that it's healthy, and I think that it's still part of the past.
We are not, in the Houston area, a mostly white population. We are not the majority. We are not mostly white.
There are groups of people that feel as if they're losing something instead of seeing this country as one that has evolved.
It makes you feel a little bit like what was once familiar to you, what was once your home, is now a little bit different, and you're going to have to adjust to that.
People have the opportunity to express, and mix in with other cultures, like in restaurants or in museums or in the workplace. But when it comes to our living situations, most of us still live in some neighborhoods that are considered segregated, or parts of town that are traditionally Black or traditionally Asian or traditionally Hispanic or traditionally white. And so when it comes down to our living environments, we can say that our experience there isn't as diverse as it should be.
After seeing that, any of you have a reaction initially to it?
I believe the term diversity is a political term. And when you hear it, people believe that you're automatically supposed to get happy. But where there's diversity and no equality, what good does your diversity, do? What good is it if it doesn't mean that there's a level playing field for everyone? So I'll be honest with you, when I hear the term diversity, it's a turnoff to me. It makes it look good. It speaks to, it speaks to the visual. Yeah, we look good because we have so many different people from so many different walks of life and different cultures in our city. But let's take a look at the numbers. Let's look at the employment numbers. Let's look at the educational system, the schools in the inner city versus those in other areas. And if we don't see equality within the numbers, then our diversity goes for naught.
When you look at where people live, you can drive. I work at the University of Houston, so I'm in the third ward pretty much every day. You can drive down the street in the third ward and work out where the boundaries used to be, right? Wooden houses over here, brick houses over there. I mean, it's really clear that there is a history of that. We've got a lot of work to do when it comes to turning diversity into access and opportunity. We've got a lot of work to do. But on the other hand, our demography has shifted so much here in Texas, and particularly in the urban part of Texas, which is where about 80% of Texans live, that I see reasons for hope. I mean, I grant the challenge, but I see reasons for hope.
So in my neighborhood, I'm on the southwest side of town, and it's quite the mix. But I've lived there now for about 4 years, and during that time discerned in community that the need of our neighborhood, the need of the community is for trust building. You know, there is that history of the way things were, and now apartment complexes that have been turned over, and new neighbors live in them, neighbors that do not look like me. There's the need for friendship building, for relationships, and that takes time. It takes a long time to move from diversity to multicultural or multiracial inclusivity to happen.
With the people that you live with and the community that you work with, and what does the word diversity mean to them, do you think?
So when we talk about it in our community, we say, okay, diversity, we're checking off a box. But we need to move to the next step of inclusivity. So, okay, we're in the room, it's not enough. So for our community, it really means there's invitation to do more work.
We are making progress, right? But again, I think we have to move from the checking the box and saying, oh, look, we have representation from all these people, and really move towards inclusiveness, which is the action of bringing everyone together to really understand cultural needs and desires and how those blend together.
What happens when those neighborhoods begin to, for lack of a better term, let's call it gentrify, right? Then a whole other cascade of challenges come into play that have to do with people being able to afford to stay in the houses that they've been in for a generation or two or three because they can't afford the property taxes. So we have to get engaged civically in a way that helps us have an elevated conversation that's not just about what are the relationships between ethnic groups, but rather where are we trying to go as a city and how do we get there? What do we need for our neighborhoods? What do we need for our schools? What do we need for our infrastructure? And it's clear we're in that together. Even if we're in a salad bar, right? I'm not gonna just get the green stuff. I'm gonna have to get some tomatoes and other things, right? So I think the more conversation we're having about the role that each of us play civically, the less focus there's going to be on our differences, and the more focus there's going to be on how can we become a 21st century city that our peer cities admire.
And I think we also have to be okay with having the conversation, right? Because part of the problem with advancing the conversation from diversity to inclusion requires kind of what Hannah was talking about around education, right? So how do you engage in a conversation about ethnic background and ethnic context, right? Topics that are pretty much taboo, right? You don't talk politics, you don't talk race, and you don't talk sex, right? So if that's off the table, how then are we supposed to advance that conversation if it's taboo, right? So I think first we have to remove the taboo and say, you know, everybody who's engaged in this dialogue around ethnicity and background and blacks and whites and where we are, we have to know that everyone is coming from a place of not malice, right? That the intent is truly to learn and to be educated. And that's on all sides, right? And I think we're so often offended that then the dialogue shuts down. So we have to move, I think, beyond that initial piece.
Dr. King's dream never was fulfilled. He asked for integration, not desegregation. And his successors met with the then sitting president and accepted desegregation, and we are suffering from desegregation.
Well, the old past was a Jim Crow past. We have to be aware of that. It was a separate but equal. As a young person, I knew that was a lie, but we still have a significant problem with that, and I don't see that it's gone away. Now, I see that it has changed in the younger generation.
If you want to raise doctors and lawyers, you start in the first grade, and that is certainly not equal around the city.
You go to schools in African American communities, AC doesn't work. No technology. But then you go to other communities, they have more than enough. They have everything they need, all the technology that they need.
When we had segregation, when we were Negroes, with Negroes we had corner grocery stores, we had service stations, we had our own schools, we had our businesses. But we became African Americans, we lost everything.
We're given equal opportunity, and if we're willing to work and persevere in this country, you can get ahead.
You know, I mean, how can our kids perform on a high level when you don't even have the basic necessities to feel comfortable in school?
I was describing to my freshman students a couple of years ago how school districts are funded. So here's a room full of freshmen, they've not really thought about this before, and I'm telling them, look, school districts are funded based on property taxes. So wealthier neighborhood schools get more money, poorer neighborhood schools get less money. And one of the students in there says, the system is broken because that means if you're the child of a poor family, you're going to go to a lousy school, which means your SAT scores are not going to be that great, which means you're not going to get merit funding when you can't go to college. And it's a cycle. And it's broken. And another student in the room said, no, it's not broken. It's rigged. This is supposed to be this way. This is how the system is doing exactly what it's supposed to do, right? So the challenge that we have is that the very way our educational system is organized causes some students to be the victims of their zip code. It doesn't mean, of course, that if you're Hispanic or African American, you can't go succeed. Is it possible? Sure, it's possible. Is it what happens most of the time? No.
One of the ways that you maintain power over a people is through the educational system. If there is inequality in education, there will be inequality in social skills, there will be inequality in economic status. It's just bound to happen. And we got to remember that this integration thing, this was not something that America voted on. Think about it. Mm-hmm. Had they put it up for a vote, would we have achieved it?
Where it was voted on, it didn't pass.
It didn't pass, exactly. Right.
So this was something that was forced on a lot of people. And since they said, you know what, since you're going to make us swallow integration, what we have to do now is go behind the door and we have to set up a system where we still remain in power. So I say it all the time, you know, Jim Crow is not dead. He just put down the bullhorn and he picked up a briefcase. And he carries that briefcase in the educational system in America.
This is a fairly new concept aside from chattel slavery, right? The notion of kind of the economic disparity that exists, because you look at the 1920s and the early 1900s, and you had Black Wall Streets all over America where blacks were thriving. There's something that happened in history that flipped the switch, and it wasn't slavery. There's something that happened on America's grounds post-slavery that flipped the switch, and as blacks, we not only lost our economic prowess, but we also lost our identity.
You talked about how during what they call segregation, we had Black Wall Street. We had black coffee shops, we had black-owned hotels, we had black-owned everything. Why? Because we were forbidden to go and be patrons at white-owned businesses.
So there was a market.
Yeah. Right, so we had no choice. What did we do? You come in, you capture the market, and you do what we're preaching today. You circulate the dollar in your own community. Yeah. Next thing you know, you've got millionaires popping up. You don't want us to go to your schools? We'll build our own. The literacy rate was higher then than it is now.
Exactly.
But when integration took place, and I call it the illusion of inclusion, we got up in mass and we were happy to go and patronize their businesses, but no white people came to our side of the track and came to strengthen those black businesses. So the black businesses shut down. We abandoned our own businesses in the name of integration, but it was really the illusion of inclusion, and that has carried over into the educational system and every other system in this country.
Who's accountable for this disillusion? I mean, who needs to be addressed? I mean, in terms of this inequality, especially in education.
I think if it falls squarely on the foot of blacks, right? I think there are a ton of issues that internally we have to resolve, right? And I'm not saying that there aren't external factors out there, right? But I understand what is being said, but I also think that you have to wonder what brought that psychosis on for blacks to think it's better over there with the forbidden stuff that we couldn't have before, and maybe that was it. Maybe that was the psychosis
right there.
You
always want what you don't have.
So here again, there's a reason for hope. I mean, there's a gap between completion between rich and poor and black and white in higher education, but at the same time, there are more black students, Hispanic students, every other kind of student in higher education now than there ever were. In the early 70s, when I was born, something like 9-10% of people got a bachelor's degree. It's now a third almost in the United States. 22 or 23 million students will start university, post-secondary education in the fall. It's not a bad thing. More first-generation students than ever. What we're talking about is a disparity, though. So it's not enough that more people go to school, but we're seeing a disparity between accomplishment, between completion.
But let's talk disparity, Doc. And I agree, you have more black, brown, and quote unquote others in higher education. But those are the ones that made it. The high school dropout rate is higher now than ever before. And let's not talk about the disparity in the prison population.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, we've got more black people in higher education now, and that is a good thing. That's a good thing. But at the same time, we really have many, 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 many more who languish in prisons, some for crimes they did commit, some they didn't commit. Some of them, when they're out of prison and they've got, I call it the F word, the felony on their back, it's difficult for them to move forward.
And we know there's a disparity of sentencing as well.
So I don't argue with you. I agree in many ways we have moved forward, but in so many other ways,
But I go back, right? I go back to ownership, right? So I'm a huge fan of accountability and ownership. Why are we dependent on the public school system to educate our children, right? Before kindergarten ever started, and my mother was a nurse delivering babies, so it worked, night shift and everything, so she could be very present. My father was at home, but I remember my mom taking me to the teacher's supply house, and we would get all kinds of great little books and all sorts of everything, right? And my mom would have flashcards and we'd be doing so, and education was like in the home. Mm-hmm. When did we abandon the idea that parents need to start, I should be able to read long before I get to kindergarten?
When you hear this talk about education, all that, and that, I think sometimes it could be said, we're taking a Pollyanna look at what the realities are of what these families are going through. And oftentimes, and I'm not talking racially now, I'm talking income-wise, that at the low end, to actually get the time to teach your child to read, to do all that, there are issues facing these families that a lot of us don't understand.
Folks in my community are a lot of families who've been enduring trauma. So and that trauma is passed down, generation. And
wow.
So for our community, we've learned that we need to take responsibility, and kind of the notion of family expands. That we're in this together. If one parent is incarcerated and one parent is working the night shift, and how do we come alongside children? And these are my kids too.
I believe that before we truly talk about integrating the white community and the brown community and the black community and the Asian community, each community has to come to the table strong enough to not get sucked up and swallowed up by the others who already have a well-defined agenda. So in my community, I promote, or we promote, the Nation of Islam promotes us as a people first coming together. But the goal is to make your community whole. And once you've made your community whole, and you've got a grasp on your culture, your history.
You can collaborate.
And you've taken
on equal terms. Yeah.
Listen, and you've taken control of the politics and the economics and the education in your community. Now you come to the table strong enough to be able to say, hey, let's talk, let's do business.
A good friend of mine put himself through law school and become a very successful lawyer, and he paid for it all himself. He had no help from his family. Now, there's no reason a black child can't do the same thing if they're motivated and they've got the mental ability to do that.
I believe that affirmative action is still needed.
Sure.
If folks can fully understand why it exists and what it does. Because here's the thing, affirmative action is for everyone who's underrepresented.
Affirmative action is clumsy, arbitrary, and rarely completely fair. But I think it is probably still necessary.
I think it takes away in some part that last bit of incentive that people need to make it over the top, to know that they were given something that everybody else had to earn.
People of color who earned the right to have a seat at the table were then made sure to get the dinner invitation with the wrong date on it. So affirmative action is to just simply open the door for people who should have been there in the first place. And so it's just such a burden on my heart to hear people vilify the concept of affirmative action as if these people who don't qualify are taking something from me.
If you knew that you were hired for a job or that you were on the rolls of a university that you wouldn't have been if your skin color were different, how does that make you feel? I don't know that that's a very affirmative feeling.
My reaction is pretty much the nerve of them. The nerve of them. You know, here you are about to run a 100-yard dash against someone who has one leg. You beat them every time. Somebody comes around and comes along and gives them a prosthetic leg, and you're complaining.
They're cheating. Yeah.
Now I don't want to race anymore.
It bothers me as a black female to think that people look at me as if I achieved something in my career because I am black and because I am female. And it bothers me to think that's the only reason why you let me in. You let me in, right? Or people perceive that I was let in, not because I'm brilliant, which by the way I am, but because there's this quota hanging over your, you know, so to me, I get her idea of that's not a very affirming feeling to have. Is it needed? You know, I'm on the fence, right? I think that there obviously folks need help coming to the table to be diverse and inclusive, obviously. But I also think that we have a capitalistic society, right? And if you don't want my talents, your competitor probably will.
Affirmative action, that used to mean a very particular thing. It came from an executive order from JFK. And what the order said was it's not enough just to not to continue this Jim Crow behavior, but you have to do something affirmatively to cause it to be the case that equally qualified people are considered for jobs.
White women benefited from it more than black people did. Jewish people benefited more than black people. Look at the numbers. We really have not benefited as a whole from affirmative action. Maybe we benefited, some have benefited individually, but as a whole, so the nerve of them, when you look at the fact that the wealth gap between blacks and whites today is higher than it's been in decades. So it's not even affecting you at all. But I think it's the gift and the curse. It could have been the gift because let's just be honest. If you put Black America's sojourn in America into a pie chart, okay, if we did 300 plus years in chattel slavery, and we're 150 or so years up from slavery, that's just a small slice out of the pie. What about those other 300 years? So of course it set us back. It darn near killed us. So for someone to say, let's make concessions for the descendants of those that we used to build the White House, to lay down the railroad and to clear the underbrush, let's make concessions for them to complain?
I mean, I didn't see what I would call an informed response about affirmative action, particularly from the white community. They didn't say, oh, isn't it cool that we went from 1% women in engineering in the mid-60s to now 10, 12%, I think is about where it is. That's remarkable. Physicians are nearly half women, lawyers are nearly half women, or maybe more. And that's remarkable. And yet the response was, at least if I'm reading it correctly, a lot of people are getting something they don't deserve.
We live in America. America was built on discrimination and racism, and it is what it is.
I think most of the racism issues that we still see present in our community are largely based on fear of the unknown.
I saw a young lady, a Caucasian lady walking into a store, and she had a lot of bags in her hand, so the first thing in my mind is to hold the door. I go to hold the door, she steps back from the door, then goes to the whole other door and try to open the door herself. And I felt it hurt my heart because I was genuinely trying to just hold the door for you. I don't want nothing from you.
I was 18 years old working in the store, and there was a little 6, 7-year-old kid in there. And I said, can I help you? And he responded to me, my mom told me to never talk to niggers.
When I was a kid, I was told that black men could not learn to operate complicated machinery. So there were no black truck drivers, for example.
I think that the concept of racism has forced the people that feel the most oppressed to legitimize who we are when others don't have that same burden.
There are certain people I admit I've got prejudices against. For example, if you got a gang-looking kid with tattoos everywhere and his head shaved off, I'm going to be probably wary of him, and he's not going to be my best friend. But it doesn't matter whether he's black or white. Same thing if I see a black kid with his pants down to his knees and a hoodie on and like he's a gang type, I don't want to be his friend either.
But I know a lot of brothers that are on campus banging grades in sagging pants and hoodies. Just because that's their fashion style doesn't mean that's their mentality.
Hearing the man's story about trying to hold the door open for a woman walking through the door, that just hurts because I see it. I see it because I was raised that way as well, and it's taken work of my own of looking at how racism has hurt me, that the healing needs to happen with everybody, with black and white communities.
Where do you think that refusal comes from?
We got it with our mother's milk. I mean, I did anyway. I mean, I come from a long line of pretty accomplished racists. So, it took for me, it took knowing people who weren't like me. It took college, the things I learned in college about what the world is like and what the plight of others is. I mean, that's how I got my eyes opened.
I think one thing that stands out for me in all of this is that we as a white community watching something like that feel the pain and the shock of what our African American or black brothers and sisters went through or are going through today. And it shocks us, where to them it is every day. And for us to be shocked, I think almost shows how far apart we are.
I don't know if y'all are shocked all the
Exactly.
time. I don't know if y'all are shocked.
You don't think so?
At least not on my Facebook page.
Yeah?
The 5,000 folks will be on my Facebook page. I don't know if there's a shock there, right? It's very dismissive. There's no shock when I say something happened, right? There's no acknowledgement, right? So if I say, And I told this story, and I got over 100 comments on this story. I went to a luxury store in the Galleria, and we got followed around the store. So I hop on Facebook. I'm like, oh my God, it's been a long time since I've been followed around a store, but today it happened. And the comments that flood in weren't, Natalie, I'm sorry to hear that you went through that. It was, oh, well, I'm white. I get followed around the store too. I'm not asking you what your experience is.
No,
I'm telling you what my experience is. And then I got, well, are you sure they were following you? Yes, I'm pretty sure I know what my own personal experience is, right? So it's this dismissiveness that happens. There's no shock. It's just either, oh yeah, it happens to me too, get used to it, right? Or that didn't really happen. You misunderstood the person's intention.
A lot of the white community feel that it doesn't exist, or at least you're fanning the flame. Mm-hmm. We did that in the past back then. We've moved on. Mm-hmm. How do you
moved on?
How would you characterize that?
You're playing the race card. If you point to disparities in access or opportunity, you're playing the race card.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Sometimes,
how do you address that?
Sometimes when people appear to be repulsed by overt racism, and they say, what are you doing? We don't do that anymore. We did that 40 years ago. They basically mean we don't do it that way anymore. We understand that it's systematic because we benefit, but we don't do it overtly anymore. Were you ever taught to dislike white people in your home?
Nope. Never.
Neither was I. No guest that you question ever said that as a black child growing up in a black home, I was taught to dislike white people. Now, doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but it's not the norm.
Taught to fear, though? Taught to be concerned with interactions with white people?
I can speak from my personal experience. I was never taught to distrust white people in my home. I was taught to, if anything, distrust black people. I had no interaction with white people growing up. So when I saw people suffering overtly with my own eyes, it was usually at the hands of someone else black. But then I grew up, I got out into the world, and then I learned different.
I think one of the ways that I have personally been affected by racism was, growing up, I had friends or neighbors who were black, and now in going to college and grad school, began to realize that the kinds of relationships that I was taught to engage with black friends, black neighbors, was one of helping, was one of, this poor person really needs my help.
My mom actually tried to, she'll tell the story about my brother, who again is 6 years older than me, and she really was trying to not teach him about race at all, until one day he came in off of the playground and he said that a little boy had hit him on the playground, and she was like, what does the little boy look like so we can find him? And he was like, he looks just like me, he's a little boy. And then when my brother walked up to him, it was a white guy, like a white kid, right? Like he had no idea what, and she was like, oh my God, I'm gonna have to teach my son. So we really didn't talk about it. But other than that, there was no talk of hate or malice or anything from other races.
This is an unscientific sample, but what I've seen, the traffic on social media, including my own friends, they're being more overt about their biases than they were a year or two ago.
But ultimately, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Is it not better to know who doesn't like you than to think everyone's pretending?
Over your head. I would so appreciate
Make it easier? Yeah.
Yes, then I know whether I should support your business or not support your business. Communicate with you very often, or just, 10-foot pole.
That's an interesting thought, because on some level, people won't necessarily communicate their biases.
I mean, it's diversity too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we're assuming that position is wrong because I guess we all feel that way. I certainly feel that way, but they don't feel that way.
I'm okay with you feeling that way. In all honesty, I mean, I am very okay with you having whatever feelings you want to have. I just need you to express those feelings so that then I can make some personal decisions for my own life, right? I'm with you on that. But it's sad though,
and it's sad, and it's sad because if you had experience with a wide range of people, it'd be very hard to come to the conclusion that black folk are worse people than white folk. I mean, that'd be really hard to justify if you knew a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
But that's not really what bothers me. So I know that there's a diversity of opinion and of views about a lot of things, and great. What bothers me is when we build a system that holds some people back while propelling some other people forward.
We can sling mud and call one another names as much as possible. We can even protest in the streets together, blacks and whites. But when the protest is over and you go home, do your living conditions look different from mine? And
more than that, do the realistic possibilities of your future opportunities.
There you go.
Because that's what's soul killing. What soul killing is knowing that you can never get where you'd like to go.
Right. And we're on the same page. The point that I'm making is that as long as racism is systematic, then the overt name calling, don't get me wrong, it's good. That's a symbol, that's a sign. And I'm like you, I would rather know that you hate me than to have to find out the hard way. But it's the systematic part. We gotta fix the system. And if the system,
it's about policy.
It is, but you know too, I think it's about policy, but before we even get to policy, I think it's about acknowledgement, right? We're at a point in our society where we don't even acknowledge someone else's pain. The ability to empathize has all but dissolved. We're just like, if you got beat by the police, you must have deserved it. If you got shot, you deserved it. If you got followed around the store, don't worry, it happens to me too, right? There's zero empathy with someone else's struggle in society. And I think until we have the ability to empathize a bit more and acknowledge the pain and hurt, whether I hurt the same way or not, you know, whether I'm low income and you work with me and my family or not, I should be able to say, I'm sorry that you have to endure what you are enduring.
I do not like getting pulled over by police officers. I've lived in just about every place in Houston, from the hood to the suburbs. As long as you're African American and you're black, they're gonna have a problem with you.
I got pulled over for the first time in Houston, slammed on a car by cops, guns drawn on me. I've been sat on the curb, threw everything out the car looking for drugs.
I tell my members, kiss your husband before you leave home. Kiss your son, because he may not get back.
The video camera on these telephones has just brought it to the forefront. It's always been happening. Black lives do matter.
I don't think the Houston Police Department is necessarily any better or any worse than a lot of others. I think some of this is learned behavior because they do seem to get a lot more police calls to lower income and black neighborhoods for whatever reason. But it is also true that when they get out of their car facing a black person, their entire demeanor is different than if they're facing somebody like me.
I trust individuals. There's some great people I know, great sheriffs, great people, but the institution of police, policing police, I don't trust that.
There are many, many good peace officers out there, but unless it is someone I know, I'm going to be very careful about trusting them.
They're humans just like the rest of us, and they're good teachers and bad teachers. Right. There's good doctors and bad doctors, and it's just the same with the police. I think you need to use your head.
I think that every time I see a report about these things, I'm able to critically look at what's happening on my TV screen, and I see, well, now see, look, there, when he said sit down, you should have sat down, and it would have stopped. But obviously the people involved in that situation at that moment with the heated things going on aren't able to see it.
You cannot really convict a policeman for a crime because the legislature gives them the right.
Certainly we need more policemen, but our policemen need to be better trained also. Not every black guy with dreadlocks should be a target.
Then segregation may be what we need until we get a system in place that allows them to understand. Don't police me, let my own police me because they understand me. I'm not an animal to him. You know, I may be an animal to you, but not to him.
I believe that this issue is a little deeper than racism. When you talk about the problem between law enforcement and citizenship, of course, it's a lot more heavy-handed in the black community. That's why most of the patrolling takes place. When you just look at the racial profiling statistics, we get pulled over and have those types of interactions with law enforcement throughout the country more than others. But a police officer shooting a black man unarmed, as we just saw recently in this case of Walter Scott, it was on the camera. He just didn't feel like chasing the guy. So he decided, you know what, these bullets can run faster than me and you. So he shot him in the back. He went on to the radio and told dispatch, I don't even like talking about it. And he tells dispatch he went for my taser. He walks up, throws the taser down, and handcuffs the man. Doesn't even call for medical help, nothing. And he dies in his own blood. A jury of 12 in North Charleston, 11 of them voted to convict, but one said, I just can't convict. I just can't do it. So you got a mistrial. Even in the case as clear-cut as that, you can't get it. Law enforcement and the systematic injustices that come from the way it's set up here in this country is a cancer in America right now.
Every man, woman, and child in America almost has a camera on them. And it has changed the national conversation. It didn't get the results it should have gotten in the case you just described and in many others in the last few years that we all know about. But I think the conversation is changing. I mean, being a police officer is a hard job. It's, my dad was a police officer, my brother's a police officer. That's a hard job, and I have some empathy for when those things go wrong, they go really wrong. But I wish I could dispute your claim that there are so many bad eggs in that batch. I can't, of course. And you only have to look at the data.
I think it's getting worse. The reason I think it's getting worse is, yes, it's true, we have more cameras. You can't argue with more cameras. And what these officers are doing is being filmed. But what's also being filmed is them being exonerated in the face of overwhelming evidence that they are dead wrong. But the only thing that I can see that is inspiring is that young people are becoming a lot more conscious of their own culture, a lot more conscious of their own blackness, and they're beginning to see the system for what it really is. And hopefully, when they go to school, they're going to school to see how it is they can make change in the world that they see. But they see the world a lot more clearer than we saw it 10 to 15 years ago.
Well, the only way you are able to be a dirty cop is if other cops allow you to be one. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we always seem to not talk about while we're focusing on the fact that someone shot so-and-so, is that the escalation of police brutality or aggressive police posturing with the citizenry is not just a single officer. It is becoming the culture of policing in the United States.
I wouldn't say it's becoming.
It probably always was because of police patrols way back to slavery, right?
Yeah. Well, we were talking a while ago about this. So I share some of your pessimism. I do. Because we were talking a while ago about the Isaac Woodard thing, right? That was 70 years ago this year. Mm-hmm. Exactly the same scenario. Cop does something clearly wrong. Everybody knows it. He, I think, admitted it. There's a trial. He's exonerated, or at least acquitted. It gets national attention. The President of the United States has a response to it, says everything's changed now, we've turned a corner. And then it didn't. Now, 20 years after that, Bull Connor's turning the dog loose on black folks in 1963 in Birmingham. Yep. Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, we've turned a corner. Have we turned a corner? What's it going to take to finally get around the corner?
I do think that the media tends to fan the flames. They take something that could be a 2-second problem that was probably pretty minor, and they tend to blow it all up if it has anything to do with a racial situation, whether the perpetrator of whatever this was is black or white, if it's between two people.
For many people who don't have an experience personally with a black person. Say they didn't have anybody black in their neighborhood, nobody black in their school, nobody black at their church. What they see portrayed in film and in movies and now in media such as social media and the news is negative. And so it helps cause that whole perception of, why do I look at him and immediately think he's a thug? What makes me think that way? Well, that's what I see in the movie. That's how they're dressed in the film. That's what I see on news for bad people that are doing bad things.
What we lose sight of is that for many people, that is the only image they have of young black men.
Maybe we don't need to know about every protest and every rotten thing that's said, you know? Maybe that doesn't need to be on the news, every one of them. I don't know.
There's power in connectivity, and social media has given platforms for it to rise. Because where you felt isolated, maybe I think this way, but maybe, you know, this way I think, me and my family, we think this way, you know? And now I'm able to connect with somebody else. This person's in another state, and they think this way too. And then this person's in somewhere other place, and they think this way. So I'm not crazy for thinking I must be right.
We talked earlier about police officers and what happens in the country. Oftentimes when you have a young white rookie officer who's been dropped into an urban community, a black community, if you will, if his only interaction or the majority of his interactions with young black males have been through the movies that he's seen, then it is that depiction of that race gender that determines how he handles that particular situation. The media is the bridge between cultures in this country. And with that comes a great responsibility. Too often it is not handled responsibly at all. The same inequities that we see in the educational system, in the economic system, we see in the media as well.
So my concern, I do this as a deep concern as somebody who tries to teach young people to think for themselves and to be able to differentiate a quality claim from one that's dubious. They're being inundated with information, much of which is misinformation, or at best it's
misguided.
It's half true.
Yeah, half true.
Exactly.
And so this is we don't have Walter Cronkite making sure that the sources are checked and double checked. Yeah. We have push a button, and so I agree. If I see this and say I don't like this, I turn it off. But a billion people, literally a billion people, are getting in 30-second chunks.
Well,
in their feed, in the news feed they have in their pockets.
And you couple that with kind of what social media drives, right? So before, you kind of got news from specific places, and that was it, right? Your local news or whatever. But now, social media allows you to block out any news you don't like. Right? Any other piece of evidence.
Yeah, and gorge on the stuff you do like, even if it's not true.
Even if it's not true.
You can gorge on a fake news story about Hillary Clinton running a kiddie sex ring out of a pizza joint in New Jersey or wherever.
Right. I mean, we were still having a dialogue about whether Trayvon Martin lived in the neighborhood that he was in. I'm like, y'all, it's already been fixed. Yes, his daddy lived in that neighborhood. Can we stop having this conversation? And people are still like, no, because whatever news said it. I'm like, y'all, come on now. So you can cut off whatever you don't want.
We talk about lack of education that's out there, yet messages are getting in. So is it something we're not doing right with our education system because we're still reaching people? How do you make sure it's like eating a meal, that they're getting nutritional information and not junk food information?
I mean, the way that I'm seeing it happen is conversations, mentors of, sitting down with a tween, not even a teenager yet, but kids that are on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, hours. So having those conversations around knowing what is true, how to read things consciously, how to filter, and how to listen well, how to read well.
We have a serious challenge with this, and I'm partly to blame for it because of my industry. Like the higher education industry, one thing we're not great at is change. We're delivering our content more or less in the same way we were delivering it 100 years ago or more even. We are not crafting our curriculum to address the problem that everybody's got their private news feed and misinformation feed in their pocket.
I was a conservative, listening to conservative talk, and I was just like, no, that's not quite, I'm a conservative, but that's not quite what I think, right? And so for me, I was like, there has to be other people who are conservative, libertarian leaning, who the Houston conservative talk radio formats don't fit their ideals either, right? So social media has, and other media formats do allow us to put unfettered opinions out there, right? My biggest concern is just how much you can tailor it. And I remember in school, you had to write persuasive papers, right? So regardless of what my stance is, I can argue for abortion or against abortion and make valid claims on each side, right? I don't know if people are capable of doing that anymore. I don't know if anybody's able to articulate a position that is opposite of something that they hold deeply.
What I think social media has done, and it goes back to your question, how do you control or how do you filter the information that comes in and out of your community? You have to become a source for that information, and this is what social media has given us the opportunity to do. It's almost like, you know, the kitchen is open now. Now that the kitchen is open, if I'm still eating somebody else's cooking, then I still don't have control over what's going on in my body. No, you go and you cook it yourself. Yep. You prepare it well yourself. So what social media has done is open up the arena where we can come in and have our own radio shows. But now it's up to you to make certain that that radio show is filled with information that's well researched, it's filled with yes, vitamin-filled information, if you will, something that's good for your community.
We have to keep in mind something that Martin Luther King Jr. used to say. I mean, he said a lot of great things, but people forget that when he was in Memphis, when he was assassinated, he was there advocating on behalf of garbage workers who were going on strike. What he did in the later half of his work was care a lot about poverty. And he made the point over and over again that budgets are moral documents because they reveal what you care about. We have to put our money where our mouth is. If we care about disparity and we care about equality, maybe even hold race aside of that conversation a little bit, we can see that there is a concentration of wealth in the U.S. over the past couple of decades, and that ought to be troubling to people who care about communities. We can see that this is happening and we're not doing anything about it. We are not causing our representatives to do anything about it, and one of the reasons is they're bought by the same process that caused it to be that way in the first place. So we have to vote. we have to make sure that all of our friends in our communities know that we care about disparities and equality, and that we do everything we can to be agents of change.
I think that we should begin to rebuild. I believe that if the public school system will not educate our children in a way that makes them productive citizens in our community, then we should take control of the education ourselves. If we believe that we don't have proper representation in these seats where elected officials sit, I believe that we have to begin to grow our own candidates, get behind them, put the full force of our power, our might, our economic power behind them. And I think that we should put people in office that will represent our agenda first and foremost. And lastly, as far as economics is concerned, we have to circulate the dollar within our community the way we did it before integration to make us viable and strong again.
There's got to be that growing in empathy, growing in listening, being able to let down my guard and become more aware of my own story, and then how I connect with my neighbor's story. Agree with both what y'all have said so far as well, but that piece around empathy, listening is crucial.
We have to proactively seek out new interactions. We have to remove ourselves from our comfort zone. And I think we have to be intentional about that and about being empathetic to others, regardless of white or black, right? I need to understand that white people are being asked to change and evolve. That's a difficult thing to do. And black people are trying to find their seat at the table and take it authoritatively. And that is also a challenging thing to do. And you can do both and love everybody simultaneously while you do it.
As this conversation draws to a close, I'd like to thank our guests, Natalie Arsenault and Dr. Andrew Hamilton, Reverend Hannah Terry, and Derek Mohammed.
This program is just one part of a year-long initiative at Houston Public Media to take a closer look at our community and all of the different groups and people that make up our city. You can learn more about the initiative, re-watch this program, share your feelings, and much more at houstonpublicmedia.org/diverse-city.
We leave you now with the thoughts of each of our groups on how we all move forward together. On behalf of Houston Public Media, I'm Ernie Manous.
And I'm Eddie Robinson. Thank you for watching.
If this problem is going to be solved, there needs to be honesty, real honesty on both sides.
I'm going to have to deal with it day to day. I've got to change myself. And if I can change myself just a little bit, and somebody else can change themselves a little bit, it's going to get better and better and better.
There are things that we all want in common. We want safety. We want equal access to education. Right. We want financial and economic empowerment. We want to see our communities look well and be well. So at the heart of it, all of us want the same thing in life.
You do have to approach people on an individual case-by-case basis.
You have to take a step back and say, what is my common experience and reason to see beyond the color line?
And it's coming up through the kids. The younger the kids are, the less you see any kind of a problem between black and white.
I think a lot of these issues occur because of the unknown, and we all are creating preconceived notions about the other, and we're not ever having conversations about it.
I think what we need to do as a society is to reach out of our comfort zone and get to know some other people.
And I think it literally takes going outside of the social norm or outside your bubble or outside of whatever it is that you ascribe to and figure out what it is to be in somebody else's shoes. What does it look like to walk in this person's shoes?
Eventually we're going to get there, but I think it's going to be taking little baby steps, and each person needs to take that tiny little step.
We have to see the humanity in one another.
Yeah.
And that goes across all color lines,
Absolutely.
ethnic backgrounds, whether you were born here or not.
Yeah, that's good.
You're still part of the human race.
Yeah.
And we should all want to see one another succeed and excel.